Hey guys, my name's Alex and I make videos about beauty, pregnancy, and now I'm going to branch into a little bit more of work and healthcare. I actually have some old vlogs from years ago when I was at university studying to become a nurse, so definitely check those out if you'd like. I was a lot younger, but they're cute, they're really nice to look back on. I also used to write a blog back then, which I really enjoyed at the time. So this video, I thought it'd be a good idea to make a video about nursing and midwifery. I am a nurse, a registered adult nurse in the UK. I'm also a registered midwife in the UK. So I thought that it would be a really good opportunity for me to talk to people who are potentially deciding on what they want to do their A-levels on, deciding whether they want to go to university, deciding whether they want to have a career change later in life, and you know, maybe you're throwing the ideas about, should I become a nurse, should I become a midwife, or you know, healthcare in general. I think it's a really interesting topic. I also think when I was, you know, 16 deciding on my A-levels, I would have really benefited from watching something like this. So yeah, hopefully this is going to be a bit informative. I'm planning not to ramble too much. I'm really going to try not to. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content. Like I said, I make lots of different types of videos, and if there's anything that you guys were particularly interested in, just ask me. It's as easy as that. So let's start with the basics, maybe my personal experience. So when I was at school, I had to choose what A-levels I wanted to do when I was 16. And you do them for 2 years. I personally found A-levels really, really challenging. That time of life, you're a teenager, you're experiencing life as like a semi-adult for the first time. And yeah, I didn't know what to do. When I made the choice to take the A-levels that I chose, I did not have nursing in mind. I come from a very nursey background. My mum was a nurse, she was also a midwife at one point and a health visitor. My auntie's a midwife, my cousin's a nurse, oh god, my uncle's a social worker. Literally nearly everyone in my family worked for the NHS at some point. So yeah, I think that definitely impacts your decision making when you come from a family of, you know, a particular career type. So when I was in school, I chose to take biology, chemistry, English literature and politics and government at AS levels, so that's the first year. I did terribly in chemistry, so I dropped it. So for my A-levels, I just did the biology, English lit and politics and government. Like I said, I really didn't enjoy it. I did very, very, very well in my GCSEs and I did not do so well in my A-levels. I think I got 3 Cs. Bear in mind, this is 9 years ago now, so I'm like racking my brain to remember. So when I was in 6th form, I was toying with the idea of becoming a nurse when I was about 18, when we were applying for places at university. And people kind of advised me, don't work for the NHS, you'll work very hard, you'll never get paid a lot, and there's other options out there, basically. So I actually applied to do business studies. I'm not going to name where I studied and things like that, but I applied to a big city to study business, and I did that for 6 months. I really hated it. It was just not for me. I found it very not hands-on. It was only 8 hours a week that we had to study, or you know, had to go into lectures. I find it very difficult to motivate myself to work. I need to have something to work towards. I need someone to tell me to go to work. I don't know if you're the same kind of person. I'm very practical. Although I am academic and I can do well in academic work, I am much more of a practical person. Fortunately for me, when the 6 months came around and I decided this just was not for me, I did need to do nursing, because it was almost like I tested something else out and my brain was telling me, no, nursing is what you need to do. You were right all along. Fortunately, I managed to apply for nursing and do a straight swap, and I started my nursing in April 2012. Which is crazy. 8 years ago I started my nursing training. That's insane. I've just realised that I'm basically giving you a story about my history rather than actually talking about nursing midwifery. But we'll do both, but it'll end up being a long video. So I did my nurse training. It takes 3 years. I didn't particularly enjoy where I was living. I was just really kind of headstrong. I need to finish my training. I did very, very well. I got a first class honours degree in that, in my studies. I was super, super proud. I actually really enjoyed my training as well. Nursing is 50-50, same with midwifery. 50-50 practical and academic work. So when I say practical work, you are going to the hospital or the community area that you're working in, and you're working the full shifts with a mentor, and you are expected to just crack on. The theory behind it is that you are doing a theory of the work in uni, and then you're going to work and putting that theory in practice. That personally works very, very well for my kind of personality and learning type, so I really enjoyed that. It's something to bear in mind if you're planning to go to university. Nursing and midwifery are not easy courses by any means. You are expected to work full time for half of the year, and when I did it, I didn't get paid at all. I know that at the moment there's different bursaries, but I also know that you have to pay your fees now. Everything's quite different. I'm not going to get too much into the funding of it because it's changing annually, and I don't want to kind of give out any wrong information, but it's up to you guys to go and research that yourselves. But yeah, you are going to be working nights, you're going to be working weekends. It's intense. So I qualified in March 2015. I was 22 when I qualified. I just turned 22 literally like the week before. And I started my first job, I think it was like 31st of March. So my first job was in an acute hospital on an acute ward. It was a gastroenterology, respiratory and dermatology ward. It was quite the mix. It doesn't exist anymore, not in that sense anyway. I worked there for my first year. It was incredibly stressful, incredibly difficult. To be honest, I think wherever you work as a newly qualified nurse in the UK for the NHS, you are going to have a bit of a tough time in your first year. I'm just going to put it out there. You have a ton to learn. The NHS is well known for being understaffed, underfunded. You are always pushed to your limit. It's very rare that you have a day where, at least in 2015, it was very rare that you'd have a day where you would have all of the staff that you needed. It just never ever happened. You were always understaffed. You were always pushed to the max. I did generally get my breaks, you know, I made sure I did that. You have to look out for yourself. But anyway, I learned loads. It was extremely challenging, extremely stressful, particularly because of the speciality that I was working under. I had a very, very good management there who I felt very supported by, and I felt like I developed massively in the course of 12 months. Once a year was up, I actually changed to a cardiology ward within the same hospital. My idea behind this was that I wanted to work with acutely unwell patients, but I wanted to work somewhere that was more structured, where you were kind of better supported, and potentially where the patients weren't so demanding. I didn't enjoy cardiology. I think I like demanding places, what can I say? I worked there for 8 months, which I know is a bit rubbish, but I just didn't enjoy it and I couldn't stick it out any longer. I learned a lot about the speciality in itself, but in terms of the hospital that I was working in at the time, it was not as acute as I was expecting. It was much more routine stuff, and yeah, it just wasn't for me. You know, we all have our preferences. So from there, I then moved to A&E. I never did an A&E placement as a student, so this was my first ever experience of it. And I've got to say, I really, really enjoyed it. It's extremely hard work in some ways, and I would recommend that you don't go straight to A&E as a newly qualified nurse. I think you do need to have some background experience behind you, because you are looking after every Tom, Dick and Harry that comes through the door. You are not looking after one speciality anymore. So you need to have a little bit about you, and you know, I was only 22 when I started my career. I was quite naive and I needed a bit of, you know, getting used to the public and looking after people and what that can include. So I worked in A&E then for 1 year, because before all of this happened, when I was about 15 years old, I wanted to be a midwife. It was something I've always wanted to do. I never did it because I felt like I was never going to get the good enough grades to do it. And it was always my goal, always, from before I even started university as a nurse. So when I was actually working in A&E, all of these jobs were full-time, by the way, I decided to apply for a shortened midwifery course. These exist in the UK. They are 18 months to 20 months long. They are for registered nurses who have a minimum of 6 months experience, I believe, and you also have to have a minimum of a 2-1 from your degree. So I managed to actually get on the course, which I could not believe. I actually applied and got on the course with one of my best friends who I met at my first nursing job. We both wanted to be midwives and it just worked out perfectly that we applied together. So I did only stay in A&E for 1 year. I found it extremely hard work in the sense that the shifts were long and they were tough from the minute you walked in to the minute you went home. You've seen, I'm sure, what life can be like in A&E if you watch the news, people queuing up in corridors. It is genuinely like that. And you feel a huge amount of responsibility to look after all of these patients that there is not enough space for, there is not enough staff for, and we are all trying our absolute hardest to keep everybody safe, keep everybody happy, which is impossible, and just get through the day. It's a tough, tough job, but I did really enjoy it there. I think I could have stayed there long term. If I never wanted to be a midwife, then I would have stayed there. But I just always knew I wanted to be a midwife. So I managed to get onto the midwifery course and I started in the September 2017. It was quite far away. So I was studying 60, 70 miles from where I lived. So I was commuting every day. When we were at university, I was commuting with my friend because we live relatively close to each other. When I was on placement, I was commuting on my own. It took over an hour each way, sometimes an hour and a half, and I was doing, 12, 13-hour shifts, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was hard work, but I knew that if I wanted to be a midwife, this is what I had to do, and it was going to be worth it, and I can honestly say that it was. So the midwifery course was super tough. I don't know if it's just a different time of life or what, but it was really, really tough. Because it was only 20 months long, but we had to do all of the same things that the 3-year course had to do, everything was crammed in. We still had to get all the hours, we still had to get all of our kind of numbers, so looking after a certain amount of women, looking after a certain amount of babies, delivering a certain amount of babies, etc, etc. And yeah, it was tough. It was really, really hard work. I felt like I worked flat out for 20 months, honestly. That's what it felt like. During this time, I was also working bank shifts as a nurse in A&E, so I would work regularly throughout that time. I was getting paid to do my midwifery course. I was getting paid a bottom band 5, which is the starting pay, which is amazing, and it was costing me a fortune to travel to and from, so I had to also work on top of that. So I was undertaking a full-time study course, sometimes where I was working full-time for weeks at a time, in the sense that I was on placement, and I was also working bank shifts on top of that. So I was working hard. I managed to get through it, and I think, so because I had a degree already in healthcare, apparently you can't have 2 degrees in healthcare, so I got a diploma. I'm not sure, not the top one, but the one below. I should probably find that out so I can tell you. Anyway, I did really, really well. I was super happy. It was the equivalent of a 2-1, basically. And, considering that I was travelling so far, I was working at the same time, I had my own home, I had so many responsibilities. I was really, really proud of myself. When I qualified as a midwife, I then did manage to get a job local to me in the same hospital that I was working as a nurse. So that was so lovely. I felt so lucky that I could do that. And it made a lot of things smoother. I had a lot of competencies that had already been signed, and I already had a lot of different things. I was used to the hospital, just all the small things of when you get a new job that really, really stress you out. I didn't have to worry about those things. So I started as a midwife in July 2019, full-time, and unfortunately, because of coronavirus, in March 2020, I haven't worked since the end of March because I am pregnant and the risk was too great. So I was supported by work to stop, and then I managed to take lots of holiday and start maternity leave early and things like that. So I haven't been too much of a burden to work, but what can you do? It's just the way it was. So I worked 9 months before I had to come away. I wasn't planning on coming away until kind of June, until now really, end of May, June time. But, you know, I have no control. None of us have any control over this situation, so it is what it is. I have really, really enjoyed my first 9 months, year of midwifery. Really enjoyed it. I worked for 6 months on delivery suite, which is the more acute area of midwifery, I would call it. It's where you deal with higher risk deliveries, inductions, acutely unwell women, women who've unfortunately lost their babies, lots and lots of different things. And then I also worked for 4 months on the maternity ward, which is where we look after women who are still pregnant, who've come in for various reasons, including induction, and then women who've had their babies, and we're helping look after them and their babies. So that's my history. I realise that is so long. I'm sorry if that's bored you. Hopefully it's a nice little story. So I've done a little bit of research, and from the university that I went to, obviously you need to look at the universities that you're planning to go to. I can see that now, if you want to go into nursing, you need to have the equivalent of 3 Bs at A level. Bearing in mind they also take into account your work experience, volunteering. It's not all about grades with nursing and midwifery. And I can see that the midwifery course, they're looking for an A and 2 Bs. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure why they look for a higher grade. I think it's more to do with less places and more applicants. The competition in midwifery is much higher than in nursing. Both of the courses are 3 years long. As I said, I did a 20-month midwifery conversion. They are becoming less and less available. Because we are paid, because we're nurses, to do the course, the NHS is unfortunately not offering them in many places, and I believe they are coming to stop offering it where I actually trained, which is such a disappointment because I've got so many friends who want to do it. So what are the main differences between nursing and midwifery? Nursing, extremely vast field. When you go to university, you're taught a little bit about everything because, as you can imagine, you can be involved in every aspect of healthcare. In the hospital, in the community, you can work on cruise ships, you can work on, with ambulances, you can work abroad. The amazing thing about working for the NHS is your qualifications are appropriate for pretty much anywhere around the globe. You can work with acutely unwell patients, you can work in a GP practice. It's literally, the options are endless. So that's great. That's a really, really amazing part of nursing. Also, there's 4 categories in nursing. So adult nursing, children's nursing, learning disabilities nursing, and mental health nursing. I did adult nursing. Adult nursing allows you to be more flexible. You can also still work in a neonatal unit as an adult nurse, just so you know. If I had done children's nursing though, I wouldn't have been able to do my midwifery conversion. So it's only with adult nursing that you can do some extras off the side. So nursing is very vast. Depending on the areas that you're in, there are opportunities for promotion and development. In more rural areas, that tends to be a lot more difficult. I guess the same in any occupation. So you start at the bottom as a band 5, that's the kind of pay scale in the UK. I believe that's now around £24,000 starting. Bearing in mind, if you're working unsociable hours, which nearly all of you will be, you get paid more for nights, Saturdays, Sundays, things like that. So your pay is actually a bit more than that if you're full-time. You then have the potential as a nurse to specialise in an area. You could become a speciality nurse in anything. A stroke speciality nurse, you could become a district nurse, so that's someone who specialises in community care. You could become a palliative nurse, so that's someone who specialises in end-of-life care. Literally the options are endless. So they are paid. Oh, also you could become a ward sister, so that's more like a management role on a ward, kind of managing all the staff, making the rota, planning everyone's shifts. They're all paid at a band 6 rate, which I believe is now around £30,000 starting, which is a pretty good wage. The issue I found with nursing is that in the area that I live in, you have to work somewhere for a minimum of about 4 years before you can even be considered for a promotion. It's not the same in all areas. In cities, I noticed that colleagues were able to progress much quicker than I was. Then moving up the ladder again, band 7, so that's paid, I believe, around 38,000 starting, and that could be a ward manager. That could be a even higher up speciality nurse. It depends kind of what speciality you're in as to whether they allow band 7s or not. There are lots of band 7 roles though, but they are kind of upper management. Once you move into band 8, you're looking at matrons. So they're people who manage a whole area. So like the whole of medicine, they will manage that. Extremely stressful jobs, and they need a ton of experience behind them. The main thing that I would say that I've taken away from working in healthcare is that experience is everything. When you work in business, for example, this is based on lots of my friends' experiences. You work hard, you learn quick, you make lots of effort, and you will be rewarded with promotions. In healthcare, it doesn't work like that. You could work so hard, you could do all of those things, but if you've only been doing it for 1 to 2 to 3 years, you're not appropriate for a promotion because you haven't experienced enough yet. So that's something to bear in mind. If you're looking to climb the ladder really quick, it's extremely difficult to do that in healthcare. So what's the reality of nursing? So generally, nurses look after unwell people. They also are part of maintaining people's health. So for example, if you work in an acute ward in a hospital, you're going to be looking after patients who've been admitted from A&E with a problem and they've been prescribed IV, so that means through the vein, medication or antibiotics. They also probably need, if they're elderly, they might need physiotherapy to help them get moving. They might need tissue viability because they've got wounds. They might need specialist equipment to help them prevent them getting pressure sores. They may need to see a doctor every single day. They may need regular reviews. As a nurse, you're responsible for coordinating the multidisciplinary team in regards to your patients. Does that make sense? So in a hospital setting, you are responsible for making sure your patients are washed and dressed and they are cared for appropriately. They are given water, they have their medications when they're due, and they are properly prescribed. You are responsible for making sure that they get referred to the physiotherapist, to make sure that they're seen by the occupational therapist, to make sure that they're seen by all these specialist teams, and then you will have to hand that over to your colleague on their next shift, and you've got to make sure that that's completely concise, everyone understands it. And the whole time you're going to be monitoring your patient, you'll be doing observations throughout the day, so blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, respiratory rate, their alert level, and off that and your professional opinion, you can decide whether your patient is stable or if they're becoming more unwell, whether they need to be reviewed again, whether they need to be transferred to ITU, whether they are fit for discharge tomorrow. If that was the case, you have to speak to pharmacy, you need to get their medications ready. What I'm trying to say is it's a very complex job. Don't feel too overwhelmed. Obviously, this comes with time. Being able to manage all of these things for potentially 8 to 12 different people simultaneously, it comes with time. I hope I haven't scared you by saying all of that. Bearing in mind, if you worked in the community, it is different. So you'll have your ledger for the day and you'll have all of your patients that you're needing to see, approximate times, you're going to be seeing them for dressings, insulin, continence assessments, bowel care. Some patients are completely paralysed and they can't go to the toilet properly. End of life care, to administer medication, there's to take blood tests, there's loads of things. Nurses are more and more and more independent. We can do so much now compared to nurses from 20, 30 years ago. In fact, we work alongside the doctors. We have to work under their plan that they make for the patient. So the things that they want to happen, that's our responsibility to make them happen. So if they wanted a blood test, we need to take that blood test. If they wanted a heart trace, we need to make sure that's taken and checked properly. But also we can call the doctors and say, you know, this is happening. I think we should do this, that, the other. And they can come and review and agree with you and go forward with that plan. So a huge part of healthcare is, unfortunately, the legalities of it. You need to document all the time. Everything you do needs to be documented. And always remember you're acting in your patient's best interests at all times. Midwifery. So midwifery, like I said, it's also a 3-year course. It's different. It's a speciality. So I found going to university, I was prepared for work, whereas as a nurse, when I actually went to work, I wasn't fully prepared because I was taught a little bit about everything. I had to learn on the job, whereas in midwifery, I was taught quite a lot about everything because everything was so small, because it's just pregnant women and babies, that I could actually absorb all of that information and be quite well prepared for when I went to work. It was a very different case. In saying that, lots of people would say that midwifery carries a lot more responsibility. Obviously, you are responsible for not only your patient, but her unborn child as well. And it can be an extremely stressful job. I personally found it a lot less stressful than nursing. I enjoy that you are a lot more autonomous in midwifery. As a midwife, considering myself, for example, I am a low-risk pregnant woman. I don't have any conditions, I don't take any medications, anything like that. So I potentially won't see any doctors for my entire pregnancy, for my delivery, everything, so long as it's all normal. In midwifery, midwives are the experts in normal pregnancy, childbirth and postnatal care. So that's what I really enjoy about it. You are very autonomous. You understand, I feel like your understanding is a lot deeper compared to nursing, because like I said, you're working in one speciality, not all of them. But there is a lot more expected of you, and yes, the responsibilities are greater, and if you make mistakes, potentially the outcome could be dire. In my job, we rotate regularly, so we go from the delivery suite to the ward to the birthing unit, which is where low-risk women can give birth, to triage, which is where women can be assessed in pregnancy and in labour, and after having their baby. You can also work in the community, so as a community midwife, you are looking after women during their pregnancies. You may also be a part of their labour, especially if they have a home birth, and then you visit them postnatally as well, in the first up to a month of baby's life, but normally just 2 weeks. So once again, the roles are varied, but midwifery is a specialism and you can only really work within that scope of practice. You can also work on the neonatal unit as a midwife. Remember, I don't know everything. I was trying to give you some advice based on my personal experience and my career, but it's always worth doing your own research as well. So I personally find midwifery very, very rewarding. I very much enjoy the birth process. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, and you know, I love helping women bring babies into the world. I really, really do. It is not all about that, I have to warn you. It can be an extremely stressful job. It carries a huge amount of responsibility. It is not about cuddling babies and, you know, congratulating mums and that's it. That's a very, very small part of the job, and I think all midwives would want any prospective students to know that. In terms of pay in midwifery in the UK, midwives start on a bottom band 5 salary, the same as a nurse does. But because it is a specialised field where we can actually prescribe some of our own medications, we make independent decisions, nursing is less autonomous than that. You will complete a preceptorship in whatever trust that you're working for. That can take 1 to 2 years depending on where you're working, and you are then eligible to become a band 6 midwife. So as I said earlier, that's about £30,000 starting. That's a very interesting difference between the two fields, because as a nurse and as a midwife, I can tell you that working in an acute area such as A&E, I was very, very responsible for my patients, and I had to make lots of decisions. So I don't agree that midwives should be paid more than nurses, because I have done both, and I can honestly say that in lots of respects my nursing was much more stressful, and it carried a huge responsibility. So I think it's a real shame that in the UK we don't all get paid a better salary for the really, really hard work that we do. I'm sure I've missed out so much, but I'm very aware that this video is extremely long. If you guys have any questions, please shoot them my way. My plan, by the way, is, if you're wondering, is to work as a midwife and to continue to pick up bank shifts as a nurse. A bank shift just means that you know, you're available on a Tuesday afternoon, so you let them know and you book a shift if there's one available. So yeah, I do plan to continue practicing that. In the UK, you have to revalidate every 3 years for your nursing or your midwifery. In my case, I have to revalidate for both. I have to do a minimum number of hours, which is the equivalent to, I believe, 6 months full time. You have to prove that you've done lots of training and loads of other things to make sure that you are fit to practice regularly. I have to make sure I do my hours every 3 years, otherwise if I do them as a midwife and not as a nurse, then I will lose my nursing pin, which is such a shame, but obviously it's important to make sure that all the nurses that are working in the NHS are suitably trained and experienced. So that's my little video for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful. Please shoot me any questions that you have. I am more than happy to answer. This is just advice, like I said, on my career, on my experiences. I've done a little bit of research here and there. I have first-hand experience of both and, you know, in relatively recent terms as well. So yeah, I hope that's been helpful. If you enjoyed, remember to subscribe and hit the like button, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.